Hello, this is Archie Dunlop with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, May the 31st, 2023. Sometimes when I do a horoscope, I ask myself, what was happening in the world when a person was born? Were there any big political events, historical events? Maybe that has some bearing on their personality. Now, unfortunately, this technique doesn't really seem to work very well. I can think of a few examples where it may say something. Take Joe Biden. He was born on November the 20th, 1942. And the day before he was born was Operation Uranus. That was when the Soviet Union made a big breakthrough around Stalingrad. So as Joe Biden was being born, some pretty incredible things were happening on the Eastern Front, and the Soviets were pushing forward and encircling the Nazis in Stalingrad. And I don't know, maybe that's had an influence on Joe Biden. Maybe he is concerned about Russia. Maybe this is why he's so obsessed about getting the better of Russia. Somehow, maybe he was traumatized by what was going on when he was born. You wouldn't have thought so, but maybe. I'm just speculating. Of course, I am just speculating. Of course, it's nonsense, but it's just a thought. Now, as far as myself is concerned, I desperately looked to see if anything was going on my birthday, when I was born. And, really, I couldn't find anything. The best I could do was to discover the day after I was born, there was a very high-profile execution. So that's something I want to talk about today. The Nazi Adolf Eichmann was executed on May the 31st. Well, in fact, he was executed a few minutes after midnight. So he was actually born on June the 1st, but I suppose European time it would have been May the 31st. And certainly the history books, when I was discovering this, always had the date of his execution as May the 31st, 1962. And because I've known about this for so long, I actually wanted to look at his horoscope today. Then I will look at today's stars, so I hope you will indulge me on this. So let us look at Adolf Eichmann's horoscope. And let me just tell you, if you don't know what was important about him. The key point about Adolf Eichmann, there he is. The picture on the right is him in his prime when he was in the SS. He was a middle-ranking SS officer. He was basically someone who followed orders. He was a bureaucrat. His specialization was facilitating the machinery of deportation of Jews to the concentration camps and the extermination camps. Well, at the beginning of his career in the SS, he was actually involved with facilitating Jews leaving Germany. Then he got involved with the killing machine. But he wasn't a top Nazi. I think his rank was the equivalent of something like a colonel. So, in one sense, he's not a particularly major figure, but his zeal for his job did lead to, hundreds of thousands of people being killed, I believe. So after the war, he fled and he went to Argentina, and the Israelis kidnapped him in May 1960, and he went back to Israel, and he was taken to Israel, and then on May that he was tried. And the picture on the left is him on trial, 20 years after nearly 20 years after the events. and then he was sentenced to death, and then on Israel time, he was on June the 1st, a couple of minutes after midnight, he was executed. So let's look at his chart. So here we go. He was born on May the 19th, 1906 at 7:30 p.m. Germans are very efficient. When you've got a German, you always have an accurate time of birth. It's kind of very useful. So what stands out about this chart? Well, the first thing that stands out about this chart is that all of the planets are to the west of the chart. They're all on one side. Okay, Uranus and Neptune are on the midheaven IC axis. But yeah, all of his planets are bunched over towards the descendant. So what does that mean? Well, the descendant side of the chart is usually about other people. It's often about responding rather than acting. So he was not the person that took the initiative. He wasn't a major decision maker. He was just a bureaucrat who did what he was told, and he did it with a certain amount of efficiency. Perhaps that's his moon in Capricorn. Moon in Capricorn, he wanted to get on, and he wanted to be good at his job. And one of the things that was said about him by, what was her name, Hannah Arendt, the banality of evil. That there was nothing specifically evil about him. He was just someone who was trying to do a good job in his own eyes, and that was his evil. At least that's the theory about him. So there is his there's the moon in Capricorn. Now, what is interesting is he has Uranus exactly on the IC right here, and Neptune exactly on the midheaven. So that's got to be important. So Uranus on the IC, the IC is the home. So you could say his home life was pretty unsettled. He moves from one place to another, I suppose, as you would do if you were in the SS during the Second World War, and then he makes this transition. He escapes Europe, escapes justice, goes to Argentina, and he lives anonymously in Argentina for, 15 years or whatever. And then, he's just doing a regular job, commuting, and then he gets kidnapped. And so that's Uranus on the IC again. And you can see Neptune on the Neptune, and then that's opposition Neptune on the midheaven. You could see Neptune on the midheaven. I suppose you could see a certain uncertainty about his career. That would be one possibility. There's a certain mystery there. That certainly would be the case once he was in Argentina. I'm afraid you could see Neptune in the worst possible light, and you could say, well, he's involved in the machinery of sending Jews to the gas chambers, and so that would be Neptune. Neptune is related to gas, I suppose, and Uranus opposition Neptune might suggest what he did, particularly towards the end of his career, when the killing machine was really in full swing. We can also see his death in the chart. Now it's true that if you were a Nazi and you were involved in atrocities and so on, you tended to be hanged. So you could say, well, it's not a big deal that it's hanged. So what if we can predict that he's hanged from this chart? I mean, Nazis tended to get hanged. After the Nuremberg trial, Nazis, those convicted, many of those convicted were hanged. In Eastern Europe, the ones brought to justice, for example, by the Poles, they were hanged. A pretty unpleasant way. It was a short, in Eastern Europe, it was always a short drop hanging, where they would be, sometimes just stood on the back of a truck, and a truck with a rope around their neck, and the truck would drive off, and they'd be left swinging. So in the case of Adolf Eichmann, we see Mars on his 8th house cusp. Now, the 8th house is a house of death, and it's in Taurus. And what part of the body does Taurus rule? It rules the neck. So, you see the hanging. But the thing is, it would have appeared that he had escaped. Once he was in Argentina, he wouldn't have got hanged. If he had, in 1960, gone back to Europe, Eastern Europe, maybe, for certain, but if he'd gone back to Germany, by that time, in the West, they weren't hanging war criminals anymore. He would have just spent the rest of his life in prison. So it would have appeared that he had, by 1960, when he was kidnapped, that he had escaped his fate. But no, he couldn't escape his fate. That Mars in Taurus on the 8th house cusp was such a strong fate that he was taken to Israel. If you're someone like Eichmann, worst place to be, and then hanged. So that Mars in Taurus on the IC really does fit. Now, as far as solar returns are concerned, I think one of the important things about this chart is it's an example of how solar returns are working. And it's the issue is not that it's Adolf Eichmann or what he did. It's just more about a demonstration of how astrology is working. Now, I've already talked about this controversy in astrology that when you cast a solar return, that is the precise time. That's the precise time the sun returns to where it was when you were born. Do you take the place of birth, or do you take the place you are when the solar return happened? Now, in my practice, I encourage people to take the birth, the place of birth. I just don't believe you can escape your fate by globetrotting, by organising it so you have your solar return in somewhere which optimises your supposed good fortune. But that's just my approach. So let's consider Adolf Eichmann's solar return in 1960. So 1960 was the year he was kidnapped. He was kidnapped in May 1960. So you would have expected March the 19th, his birth in March the 19th, 1960, which would have been his 54th birthday, to be pretty bad. So let's have a look at his solar return. This is a solar return set for where he was born. Does this give us any indication, where he was born, which was Solingen in Germany? So we've got a Mars-Uranus opposition, which is kind of interesting. That indicates that something maybe quite bad might happen. But, that Mars-Saturn opposition was around for a few days. Anyone who had a solar return on that around March the 18th, 1960, would have had that, and not all of them were kidnapped. So it's not really perhaps that personal. Anything else going on? Yeah, I don't think it's an incredibly dramatic chart. So what about if we relocated that solar return to the place he was when he had his birthday? Now, he was at the time living in a suburb of Buenos Aires. I think San Fernando. So let's relocate that solar return to San Fernando in Argentina and see what the solar return looks like then. Wow, you see, that is pretty incredible. That Mars-Uranus opposition, which was not angular, is now directly on the ascendant. He's got 20 Leo rising in Buenos Aires, 17, and with Uranus at 17 Leo, and then Mars exactly on the seventh house cusp. So, in this case, for Adolf Eichmann, the solar return relocated to San Fernando in Buenos Aires really is much more accurate than his birth solar return, which kind of annoys me because I'd like to see the birth solar return giving full results. It usually does, but not in this case. So maybe you should consider where you have your solar return. Maybe you should, if you've got the money and you don't care about global warming, you should travel to the other side of the world to optimize your luck for the following year. So, as far as his death is concerned, there's one point I wanted to make about his death, which is really interesting, and that is his Mars return. So, that is a chart for when Mars when Mars was returning to the place it was when he was born. So I'm not really interested in the chart itself, but if you look at his execution chart, here's his execution chart. Well, in fact, I should do a bi-wheel. So we'll have bi-wheel inside. We'll have his natal chart, and we'll have his execution. Maybe not. Okay, so okay, that didn't work. Okay, so anyway, so here is the execution chart. This was set for Ramla in Israel. I don't know, it's 1 minute past midnight, 2 minutes past midnight. And have a look at Mars. It's 2 degrees 11 minutes Taurus when he was executed. 2 degrees 11 minutes Taurus. Now let's look at Eichmann's chart, his birth chart. 1 minute, 1 degree 39 Taurus. So he was executed pretty much exactly when Mars returned to the place it was when he was born, and so it's not surprising that he was hanged. So I think that that's a really nice piece of astrology. The fact that Eichmann had Mars at 1 degree Taurus, 2 degrees Taurus when he was born, and he was hanged with Mars at 1 or 2 degrees Taurus. So I think that's a good thing to know. And so I think really I've said enough about Adolf Eichmann, and I will at last look at today's stars. So today we have the moon in Libra, exactly square Venus. Now, in one sense, this is good because, as I said yesterday, the moon is in mutual reception to Venus. The moon is in Venus's sign, Venus is in moon sign, so they work very well together. So that could be good for relationships. It's good for being emotional. It's good for being, good for being sensitive. It's good for showing the world what a nice person we are. But the moon, after about midday New York time, which would be 5 o'clock in the afternoon London time, or 9 a.m. if you're in California. After that, the moon is void. It's made its last major aspect to a traditional planet before leaving the sign. So we might find as the moon moves into late Libra towards the end of the day that increasingly it's going to be difficult to get anything done, particularly as the moon is in the Via Combusta. The Via Combusta is this area between 15 Libra and 15 Scorpio, and the Via Combusta is characterized by things happening that are unexpected. So we try to get things done, and just something happens and we don't get it done at all, and we could find that we waste a lot of our time. So in general, if you've got something important to do, try to do it early in the day. Particularly if you're in Europe or Asia, get it done before the moon makes that square aspect to Venus, because after that it's going to be difficult. So that's the main thing that I'd like to say about today. Anything else? Well, the hypothetical planet Poseidon is making an exact 135 degree aspect to the Aries point. And Poseidon is about dissolving into something. It's like a higher octave of Neptune. And Aries is it's like the world at large. And so we may feel that there's no point. But I don't mean that in a bad sense. We have all these fights and struggles in the material world. We worry about political fights. We worry about wars and so on. And with Poseidon making that aspect to Aries, it's perhaps a time when we're going to realize that perhaps it's all a waste of time, and that we should be thinking about something loftier, something more elevated. Now, as far as the 12 signs are concerned, they're not quite as good as yesterday, but anyway, here goes. Aries, don't take people's promises at face value. Circumstances may force them to change plan. Taurus, today is annoying, but if you do what's expected of you, you'll be rewarded. Gemini, you want to be creative, but the raw material might not be there. Cancer, even when nothing is going on, you can benefit. If you're a woman, other women might be trouble. Leo, there's something exciting in the air, but things connected with the government should be avoided. Virgo, financial arrangements aren't to your taste, but you can still benefit from them. Libra, at work you can be effective, but things mightn't go to plan. Scorpio, you don't have to be out there in the bright lights, because your behind-the-scenes actions can be very powerful. Indeed, it's probably the case, Scorpio. The less you're seen, the less you're heard, the better for everyone, including yourself. Sagittarius, people are emotional in a clumsy way. Be yourself and don't worry about it. Capricorn, just because things are unstable doesn't mean that you can't make progress. Aquarius, it's good to move from the known to the unknown, but you need to be suitably prepared. Pisces, you can deal with high levels of ambiguity because you're able right now to adapt to changing circumstances. Now, as far as the I Ching is concerned, I'm afraid I haven't got a picture here. The hexagram I got, the first hexagram I threw when I was asking what Wednesday is going to be like to visitors to this channel, was 40. 40 is deliverance. So we've got a problem and it's taken away from us. So what kind of problem might this be? Well, the I Ching does suggest that it might be other people. There are people around us who really aren't doing us any good. They're just not at our level, they're not helpful, and we don't need them in our life. So now might be the time to get rid of them. I mean, when I say get rid of them, I mean politely say that you don't need them anymore. Use a bit of subtlety, and you can part ways with them. It really is possible. So I think you know who they are. You don't. They've served their useful purpose. Did they ever serve a useful purpose? Perhaps you've indulged certain people, and the time has come where you need to say goodbye to them. And this hexagram moves to hexagram number 7, which is the army. And that suggests to me that you need to find a whole new group of people. This is particularly if you're involved in something like business or you're fighting a war or whatever. Because some people who are doing good, but when you get rid of them, you can find a new lot of people who you can trust to get things done, and through your leadership you can create a situation where you can achieve some victories. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say for today, and I will talk to you tomorrow.